This conference will now be recorded.
Can you all see the PPT? Where the PPT is visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we were discussing septicemia, and we discussed the diagnosis part. So in diagnosis, basically we how we confirm septicemia. The confirmation is by microbiological culture studies, where we can identify the particular organism. Then basic tests, such as all the basic tests for infection and inflammation, such as WBC count. The WBC count will be elevated. Then the inflammatory mediators, or there are some biomarkers of inflammation or infection, such as C-reactive protein, then even cytokines. So it sometimes the infection and all, like in severe infection and all, what happens is there will be a cytokine storm. So cytokine level will be increased. So inflammatory markers such as, so preliminarily we go for the inflammatory markers such as WBC count, which will be elevated. C-reactive protein can also be elevated. Then we have the cytokines also, such as TNF alpha, interleukin 1 beta, interleukin 6. All those things will be elevated in case of infection or inflammation. And we also have, I think we discussed regarding procalcitonin. Procalcitonin is has got some advantages when compared to the other biomarkers. So what we even discussed the advantages also. So one is procalcitonin is specific for bacteria. Then it has got less half-life, and it is absent in a healthy person. So procalcitonin level also can be monitored, and it is also helpful to assess the progress of the disease, like assess whether the patient is improving or not. So these can be done. One is mainly the microbiologic culture of the particular site, especially if we need to identify the potential source of infection. So that has to be done. Then the preliminary test can be done. Then procalcitonin level can be assessed. Then we have some scale, such as the SOFA score, quick SOFA score, and also quick SOFA score. So these are used to assess organ failure. So these are some of the diagnostic approach for septicemia or septic shock. Next, we will move on to the management. So as I told earlier, the sepsis and septic shock are medical emergencies. So if a patient is coming with symptoms of septic shock, we should not wait, because the first hour of the patient with sepsis is very crucial, and we need to start intervention. We need to give appropriate management during the first hour itself. It is very important. Like if we give in the first hour itself, the chance of survival of the patient is high. So it is a medical, considered to be a medical emergency or urgency, and aggressive management, assessment, and repeated evaluation all are part of the therapy. So what has to be done during the first hour? So first hour is considered as the golden hour. So we need to measure the lactate level. So I hope we discussed why lactate level increase in septic patient, septicemia patient, mainly because of hypoperfusion. When hypoperfusion or decreased of blood supply to tissues or organs, what happens? The organs or tissues are receiving less oxygen. So when oxygen is not there, anaerobic respiration happens, and as a result, lactate will be produced. So more the hypoperfusion or reduced blood pressure, or the patient is undergoing septic shock, there will be more lactate level. So first thing is to measure the lactate level. So initial lactate level is more than 2 millimole per liter. Again, we need to re-measure it after some time. So normal level of lactate is just 1.3 millimole per liter. So if it is more than 2, it means that it is abnormal. So it is important that first we measure the lactate level. Then next we need to obtain the blood culture. So this is And here we need to remember we need to take the sample before administering antibiotics. Then like we need to go for broad spectrum antibiotics. Why broad spectrum? So we have learned in guidelines, antibiotic guidelines, rational use of antibiotic guidelines, we learned that whenever we are going for empirical therapy means where we don't know the etiological agent. So here also we don't know the etiological agent. The patient has just come. So within 1 hour, these things are like these steps are taken. So here first we had measured the lactate level. We have given for lactate level measurement. Then we have taken the sample for microbiological culture. Then immediately again we are giving the broad spectrum antibiotics. So here we don't know the etiology. So that is why in empirical therapy we go for broad spectrum. Broad spectrum antibiotics means those antibiotics that has got coverage over gram negative, gram positive, and even some other microorganisms. So that is why we go for broad spectrum antibiotics. So empirical, for in all case of empirical therapy, we go for this broad spectrum antibiotics. Then rapid IV administration of 30 ml per kilogram crystalloid for hypotension or lactate level above 4 millimole per liter. So if lactate level is very high, more than 4 millimole per liter, or like we know septic shock, we have seen hypoperfusion and hypotension. So we need to give some crystalloids. Crystalloids are like aqueous solution of mineral salt or along with some other water soluble molecules. Classical example is this 0.9% sodium chloride. So they are isotonic solution. Crystalloid fluids means they are aqueous solution of mineral salt, aqueous solution of mineral salt. So mineral salt in sterile water along with some other water soluble molecules. So that is crystalloid. So crystalloid fluids can be given, means it should be given. Rapid IV administration of crystalloid fluid. Examples, the 0.9% sodium chloride and even ringer lactate. Ringer lactate solution we came across when we studied gastroenteritis. So ringer lactate solution, 0.9% sodium chloride, all these are crystalloid fluids. So crystalloid fluids are aqueous solution of mineral salts and other small water soluble molecules. So that has to be administered. That is rapid IV administration. Then apply vasopressors if patient is hypotensive during or after fluid resuscitation to maintain the mean arterial pressure above 65 mm/Hg. So, so in order to compensate or in order to increase the blood pressure, we are giving the crystalloid. Crystalloids are volume expanders. It will expand the blood volume. So even if after giving the crystalloid, if still the blood pressure is low, then we have to give vasopressors. So vasopressors such as example phenylephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, all these, any of these can be given. And it is essential that we maintain the mean arterial pressure above 65 mm/Hg. So it is important that the mean arterial pressure has to be maintained above 65 mm/Hg. So these are the 5 essential things that has to be done during the first hour in a septic patient. So this is means the time golden hour or the first hour is considered as time of presentation. It is defined as a time of time in the emergency department. Like it just means that the earliest time point in the treatment chart, that is considered as time 0, time of presentation. Then the blood culture, we need to obtain blood culture before administering the antibiotic. So it is important that we take 2 or more sets of blood cultures before initiation of any antibiotic, any antimicrobials in patients with suspected sepsis. So it is important that we take 2 or more set of blood culture. Then next is broad spectrum antibiotic has to be given. Then we have to also give the crystalloids. So in crystalloids, in case the recommended crystalloids are 0.9% sodium chloride or ringer lactate. Then there are certain crystalloids called as hydroxyethyl starches. So it is said that these hydroxyethyl starches, they are not recommended because these hydroxyethyl cellulose are non-ionic starch. They are starch derivative and they also are used as volume expanders. But it is not indicated in critically ill patient because it is associated with the rate of death and also kidney problems are associated with this hydroxyethyl starches. So in critically these hydroxyethyl starches are also starch derivatives which are used as volume expanders in IV therapy, but it is not a suitable agent in case of critically ill patients or even kidney failure patients because even it can cause kidney problem. Hydroxyethyl starches can cause kidney problems and not good for critically ill patients. So hydroxyethyl starches should not be given in patients who are suspected with sepsis or septic shock. Then we also seen that we need to add um, the vasopressors. So the preferable vasopressor is norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is considered as the first choice vasopressor. So these are the 5 things that has to be done during the first hour of presentation. First hour presentation is soon after the patient comes. The first hour after we receive the patient. So these has to be done initially. One is lactate level has to be measured because we know that in septic conditions the lactate level will be increased due to anaerobic respiration. Then we need to obtain the blood culture, and we have to remember that at least 2 or more set of blood culture has to be obtained. Then we need to administer broad spectrum antibiotic. Why broad spectrum? Because we are going for empirical therapy. Here we don't know the etiological agent, so we need to administer broad spectrum antibiotics. Then we know that in septic shock there is hypotension. So in order to increase the blood pressure, we have to give rapid IV administration of 30 ml per kg of crystalloid. Crystalloids are aqueous solutions, aqueous solution of mineral salt or any other, along with some mineral salt, some other small molecules in sterile water. So one the most used crystalloids are 0.9% sodium chloride, ringer lactate, etc. Then fifth one, we need to give vasopressors. So when vasopressor is indicated, like even after giving the, or even while giving the IV fluid or after giving the IV fluid, the high blood pressure is, we are not able to bring the blood pressure up. Still the blood pressure is less. And in order to maintain the blood pressure, mean arterial pressure above 65 mmHg, we need to give vasopressor, and the vasopressor of choice is norepinephrine. Okay. Then even in normal arterial blood pressure, even if the patient is having normal arterial blood pressure, circulatory shock is possible. So we need to resuscitate with IV fluids, and this IV fluids even is helpful in reducing the normalizing the lactate level. And elevated lactate level also we have discussed, the lactate level will be increased in case of tissue hypoperfusion as well. Then how we can guide the fluid resuscitation, whether the fluid is adequate, whether the how we can monitor the fluid resuscitation. We can go for central venous pressure. So central venous pressure can be measured, and if it is found to be normal, like if it is approaching normal, we can say that we can understand that our fluid resuscitation is working, or the fluid status of the patient is becoming normal. This central venous pressure is it is actually the preload. Central venous pressure, it will be if we estimate the central venous pressure, it is considered to be it is just like we are measuring the preload. We can know the preload. So in case so in that way we can identify whether the patient's fluid resuscitation is becoming whether it is becoming successful or not. So central venous pressure can be monitored to guide the fluid resuscitation. Then in certain situation, like where even if we give the adequate fluid, and again in addition to the adequate fluid resuscitation, we also give the vasopressors such as norepinephrine. Then even sometimes, even in that situation, the hypotension is still persisting. The hypotension, we have seen this that 5 steps. In that 5 steps, we saw the 4th step is giving IV crystalloid. So crystalloid is given to increase the hypotension. Sorry, increase the blood pressure. So crystalloids are given, such as sodium chloride or vinyl lactate are given so that we can increase the blood pressure. And in we have also seen in the next step, still even the patient's blood pressure has not increased, then we can go for vasopressors such as norepinephrine. And by applying these both, even still the blood pressure is not elevated, we can go for hydrocortisone, IV hydrocortisone. So this hydrocortisone, we know it is glucocorticosteroid. So these glucocorticosteroid at low doses, such as 50 milligram per kilogram, 50 milligram every 6 hours, which is a recommended dose. So if we give this hydrocortisone, it is suggested that it can improve the blood pressure. The mechanism is not the mechanism of giving steroid is the mechanism like how it is going to improve the blood pressure is not that widely accepted, but the possible mechanism is that the corticosteroid can prevent the induction of nitric oxide. Corticosteroid can prevent the induction of nitric oxide, and we know nitric oxide was the responsible agent which was causing the vasodilation. So this is a possible mechanism of corticosteroid, IV hydrocortisone in septicemia. So the possible mechanism is that the corticosteroid can prevent the induction of nitric oxide synthase, and it also can enhance the response to catecholamines. So catecholamines such as epinephrine or norepinephrine is given to increase the blood pressure. But sometimes in septic patients, these catecholamines are not working. So we can it is said that these corticosteroid can enhance the response of the receptors to the catecholamines or the vasopressors that are given. So these are the 2 possible mechanisms through which the steroids, the hydrocortisone, can increase the blood pressure in case of septic shock. So here we know that even sometimes when the blood pressure is maintained, arterial hypotension is maintained, sometimes circulatory shock will be there. Then those with arterial hypotension is there, they may not have circulatory shock. So it is not we cannot be assured about anything. So resuscitation is important, and when we do resuscitation, we can monitor it with the help of central venous pressure. So central venous pressure is a good tool which can monitor the fluid resuscitation. So in case like when we measure central venous pressure, we have an idea about the preload. So right atrial pressure, we will know. We will know about the arterial right atrial pressure, as well as volume status. In case of critically ill patients, we can know the right atrial pressure or the preload or even the volume status in critically ill patients. So it is an important way to measure the fluid resuscitation or to guide the fluid resuscitation. So, central venous pressure can be monitored in these patients. Then, in situations where the fluid resuscitation or even giving catecholamines or vasopressors, norepinephrine epinephrine or dopamine, even if we are doing this fluid resuscitation as well as catecholamines administration is done, even then the BP is not improving. Certain like it is recommended that we may give some IV hydrocortisone. So hydrocortisone at low dose high hydrocortisone, that is 50 milligram IV every 6 hours. So can improve the blood pressure. The possible mechanism is this corticosteroid can prevent the induction of nitric oxide synthase. So nitric oxide synthase, nitric oxide we know which, that was responsible for vasodilation and reduction in blood pressure. So here corticosteroid can prevent the induction of nitric oxide synthase, and also it has the ability to expand or enhance the vasoactive response to the catecholamines. So initially like uh, in what situation we are using IV hydrocortisone, when catecholamines are not working and fluid resuscitation is not working. So the patient is receiving IV fluid and the patient is receiving catecholamines or vasopressors, but still the BP is not increasing. In that point, we can give hydrocortisone. So the possible mechanism is hydrocortisone can prevent the induction of nitric oxide, and also it can enhance the response of the receptors towards the vasopressors that are given. So that is a possible mechanism. Then certain guidelines say that IV immunoglobulins can be given, should not be recommended, but this is contradictory because it is not conclusive, because some guidelines or some studies say that immunoglobulins can be given, that immunoglobulins are helpful, high dose immunoglobulins or low dose immunoglobulins are helpful. Some studies says that it should not be recommended for management of sepsis or septic shock. So it is inconclusive. Then in third step we saw we need to give the patient with broad spectrum antibiotic. So when we give so since this is an empirical therapy, so here it is necessary that the septic shock patients receive a combination of at least 2 antibiotics from 2 different classes. So we have to give at least a broad spectrum antibiotic we need to give, and we need to give antibiotics from 2 different classes. We need to give 2 antibiotics, and that 2 antibiotics should belong to 2 different classes. Then so in patients with some risk factors, if the patient is having some risk factors, so risk factors such as, what are some of the risk factors for infection? Like the patient can be immunocompromised, the patient may be having already has taken some like prolonged therapy of broad spectrum antibiotic, or the patient has cancer, or patient has HIV, cirrhosis. All these are risk factors. So if the patient has got some risk factors, then we have to add MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and the carbapenem-resistant gram-negative bacteria coverage. So we need to give antibiotics that covers these organisms as well. So in high-risk patients, we need to give antibiotics that covers these 2 specific categories of organism. One is methicillin, those those bacteria that are resistant to Staphylococcus aureus, methicillin resistant, those bacteria that are resistant to methicillin. So when we give antibiotics, we need to, in high risk patients, so in case of septic shock, we need to give antibiotics, and it is empirical therapy. So we need to give broad spectrum antibiotics, and we need to give 2 antibiotics, and these 2 antibiotics should belong to 2 different classes. This is in normal situation, in normal patients, the patients without any risk factors. But in patients with risk factors, we have to go for more coverage, such as we need to cover these 2 organisms, these 2 class of organisms as well. That is those microorganisms that are resistant to methicillin, that is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Then those organisms that are resistant to carbapenem, which is carbapenem-resistant gram-negative bacteria. So these organisms also has to be covered when we select the antibiotics for high-risk patients. Then to those patients, we need to also give antifungals. So in high-risk patient, we need to give antifungals also. So normally, if there is no risk, we have to give, since it is an empirical therapy, we need to give broad spectrum. And in case of septic shock patients,
we need to give 2 antibiotics, and these 2 antibiotics should belong to 2 different classes. And this is for patients without any risk factors. Then patients with risk factors, we need to consider these 2 organisms. We need to select antibiotics that are effective against these 2 group of organisms as well. That is methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus and carbapenem resistant gram-negative bacteria. So these 2 organisms also has to be covered. And it is also important that we also give antifungals. Then next is we have to avoid piperacillin tazobactam in case of bacteremia with cephalosporin resistant organism. So in case we have to wait for once we know that cephalosporin resistant organism is not there, is excluded. If it is not there, then we can go for piperacillin tazobactam. If cephalosporin resistant organism is excluded, if it is not there, then we can go for piperacillin tazobactam. Until we confirm that cephalosporin resistant organism is not there, we should not give piperacillin tazobactam. So piperacillin tazobactam is not indicated when there is cephalosporin resistant organism. Then when we have, once the culture susceptibility reports are available, we have to de-escalate the antimicrobials. I think we have studied this in the rational use guidelines of the guidelines of use of antibiotics, guidelines rational use of antibiotics. In that we have studied, once we get the culture sensitivity report, then we need to de-escalate. De-escalate means if the patient is receiving a higher antibiotic, we need to go for the lower antibiotic, or from a broad spectrum to a narrow spectrum. So here we know empirically we started broad spectrum antibiotic, and now we have received the culture sensitivity report. Now as we receive the culture sensitivity report, we need to carefully go through the report and see which are the organisms. In the report we know we will come across all the etiological agents. So we will know which bacteria is involved, and we have to, and in that report itself we can also see this particular organism is resistant to which antibiotics, is sensitive to which antibiotic. So based upon the sensitivity pattern, we can select the appropriate antibiotic and we have to initiate it. So that is called as de-escalation. So once culture sensitivity report is available, we have to go for de-escalation, that is from broad spectrum to narrow spectrum. And also we need to, we have in our report, we have the specific organism and its sensitivity pattern. So whichever antibiotic is found to be sensitive, then that particular antibiotic we can use in the patient. So this has to be done immediately when we have in our hand the culture sensitivity report. Then duration of treatment. So the duration of treatment is around 7 to 10 days for most of the cases. Then in case if the patient is not responding or very slow clinical response is shown. Clinical response means this, the symptoms improve, like the symptoms of the infection such as fever, chills, sweating, all those things will be reducing. So that is clinical response. So if the patient is showing slow clinical response, that patient may require a longer course. Then in case of undrainable foci of infection. So I think like as I told earlier before, it is important that we identify the source of infection. So once we identify the source of infection, we need to clean that area. Maybe if it is a toe, is the toe part is infected, we need to clean that, we need to do proper drainage, and we need to properly clean. But if we are not able to clean the site of infection, then also we may need a longer course. The patient may need a longer course, that is undrainable foci of infection. Then bacteremia with Staphylococcus aureus. Then in case of fungal and viral infection, or if the patient is having some immunologic deficiencies. So in all these situations, we can go for longer courses of therapy. So usually the treatment duration is 7 to 10 days. 7 to 10 days is adequate for majority of the cases. But in case when the patient is not showing sufficient response, sufficient clinical response, or we are not able to properly properly eradicate the source of infection, such as undrainable foci of infection, and like bacteremia with Staphylococcus aureus, or in the fungal or viral infection is there, like super infection, maybe along with the bacterial infection, some other viral infection is also present. There's some immunological deficiencies. In such cases, we can go for lower courses. Then, as I told earlier, we can go for procalcitonin levels to um, assess the prognosis. So, maybe we have planned the antibiotic course for 10 days. So, on the 7th day, we have found that the procalcitonin level has become normalized. So, it means that the patient no longer require any antibiotics. So, we can use the procalcitonin level because it is having a very low half-life. Procalcitonin is having a low half-life. So we can adjust the therapy based upon the procalcitonin level. So measurement of procalcitonin levels can be used to support shortening the duration of antimicrobial therapy. So we can say because the procalcitonin level is low, the patient no longer requires antibiotics because procalcitonin is an indication of infection. It is specific for bacterial infection. Procalcitonin level will rise only during the presence of a bacterial infection. So when the level of procalcitonin is reducing, it means that there is no bacterial infection. So at that point of time, why the patient has to receive unnecessarily more antibiotic, like more days of therapy? Because as the days increases, more doses the patient is getting, and the patient is exposed to unnecessary complications such as resistance, and also we know antibiotics, IV antibiotics, they are expensive. So so it is good, it's always good that we measure the procalcitonin level and monitor the monitor the uh, and monitor with the help of procalcitonin so that we can reduce the antibiotic use, especially in case of critical patients, ICU patients, or like infection of unknown origin and all. If we are feeding antibiotics for 4-5 days and we are not able to uh, we are not able to find out whether the patient has infection or not. So in such situation, we can go for this procalcitonin level. Then Candida infections. Candida infections are Candida albicans are fungus that can cause in septicemia. So in case when we can suspect a fungal infection, so there are certain risk factors such as immunocompromised status. So immunocompromised status means the patient's immunity is reduced. So in which all situation the patient's immunity is reduced? When we have the neutropenia, then neutrophil count. Whenever the patients, when neutrophil count goes low, neutrophils are WBCs, differential count of WBCs. So when neutrophil count goes down, there is increased susceptibility to fungal infections. So in hospital, if you find a patient with neutropenia and if the patient is also having fever, then without any question, we can start antifungals because the risk factor for fungal infection is very high. So neutropenic patients, then patients who are undergoing chemotherapy. Chemotherapy, again, we know they are chemotherapy, anti-cancer drugs can cause bone marrow toxicity. So we know in the bone marrow only all these WBCs are formed. From the stem cells, the WBCs are formed, and from the bone marrow only they are released into the circulation. So when a patient is taking chemotherapy, anti-cancer drugs, then it is anti-cancer drugs are known to cause bone marrow suppression. Bone marrow suppression means there will be reduced production of RBC, WBC, etc. So when we have reduced production of WBC, then in the circulation also it will be less. So those patients are also susceptible to fungal infections. Then transplant patients will be receiving the immunosuppressants so that transplant rejection do not take place. So if a kidney transplant or a liver transplantation is done, then that patient will be getting immunosuppressants. So immunosuppressants means they will suppress the immunity. So the patient will be susceptible to fungal infection. Then diabetic patients are susceptible to fungal infection. Chronic liver failure, chronic renal failure, all those like liver failure and renal failure are also associated with reduced immune status. Even diabetes mellitus patients are also having reduced immune status. So in these people, these patients are, or these are some of the risk factors for invasive Candida infection. Invasive Candida infection means Candida, presence of Candida in the blood. Then prolonged invasive vascular devices for like hemodialysis catheters. So in case of patients undergoing hemodialysis, how we are like hemodialysis means we are removing the blood from the body, purifying it, and again putting it back. So it is done with the help of catheters. So when catheters are put in, we have to prepare fistula and all. So when catheters are put, there is chance of infection. Then central venous catheters. Central venous catheters are also to give a total parenteral nutrition and all. We are taking the central venous access. So in those situations, so whenever catheters are used, outside things are placed, then the patient is more susceptible to get infection. Then those receiving total parenteral nutrition, then necrotizing pancreatitis, the infection, the pancreatic infection is like increased and the cells are dying, necrosis is happening, necrotizing pancreatitis. Then recent major surgery, particularly surgery also we know, surgical profile we have studied, we are cutting, we are causing incision, so there is chance of microorganism to enter. Then prolonged administration of broad spectrum antibiotics, prolonged hospital or ICU admission. So all these are a situation where the patient is exposed to the fungal infections also. Any recent fungal infection, multi-site colonization, different sites, some fungal colonies were identified. So all these are risk factors for invasive Candida infections. Invasive Candida albicans in the blood. So these are the risk factors. So in such patients, if the patient is having some of these risk factors, then we need to even think of this invasive Candida infection. So in which all patients, neutropenic patients, those who are taking chemotherapy, those who have undergone transplant, then all the diseases that can cause immunosuppression. Then if the patient is having any invasive devices, in case of hemodialysis or central venous catheter, then if the patient is receiving total parenteral nutrition, for giving like total parenteral nutrition, although we can like total parenteral nutrition is where the patient cannot take any oral food and for like some period of time because of some surgery or very critically ill patients. They cannot, those who cannot take oral food, sometimes total parenteral nutrition is indicated. Total parenteral nutrition is all the nutrients that is required for a human being, it will be calculated based on the caloric need and it will be given through the central vein. So, if the patient is receiving TPN, then he is also like under risk to get infections. So total parenteral nutrition, then necrotizing pancreatitis. Necrotizing means pancreatic disease. Pancreatitis means pancreatic enzymes are produced and these enzymes are destroying the pancreatic cells itself. And necrotizing means the cells of the pancreas are necrosis means cell death. So in such situation, all these are putting like some of the risk factors for the patient to get the Candida infections. So in that situation, we can go for antifungals. So triazoles are a class of antifungals. For example, the fluconazole, itraconazole, posaconazole, all these belong to the triazoles. So triazoles can be given. The fluconazole, itraconazole, posaconazole can be given if the patient is hemodynamically stable. Hemodynamically stable means the BP, pulse, everything is normal. Hemodynamically stable, less ill patients who have not had previous triazole exposure and are not to be colonized with azole resistant species. So triazoles can be given if these criteria are met. The patient should be hemodynamically stable, then they have to be less ill, and they have previous, like immediate past, they have not received any triazole. So in that situation, we can go for triazole antibiotics, triazole antifungals, such as itraconazole, itraconazole, fluconazole, etc. Then, if the infection is subsequently proven not to exist, like after a few days of antibiotic therapy, then when it is identified that the patient is not having any infection, then we have to discontinue the antibiotics. Then this we already discussed. Then these are the antimicrobial therapy, some of the regimens that are suggested. These are some of the examples. This class and all, I think you can learn the pharmacology. Imipenem, cilastatin. So we need to select broad spectrum and 2 antibiotics of different class. So imipenem, cilastatin, plus or minus amikacin. Amikacin can be included, or vancomycin can be included. Doxycycline can be included. Colistin or polymyxin can be. Polymyxin and all are very higher antibiotics. Like as we discussed earlier, there is even carbapenem resistant gram-negative bacteria. Gram-negative bacteria that is resistant to carbapenem. So carbapenem itself is a higher antibiotic, and there are gram-negative bacteria that is resistant to carbapenem. So the only reserve we have in case of carbapenem resistant gram-negative bacteria is polymyxin. So polymyxin is considered as one of the most higher antibiotic. That is, so here we can know that colistin or polymyxin B. So in which situation we can add colistin or polymyxin B? When carbapenem resistant gram-negative bacteria is suspected, we have to definitely add polymyxin. Then there are other regimens also. Then Candida and albicans risk factor is present. Then we can go for azoles, triazole antifungals, as we discussed earlier, the fluconazole, itraconazole, posaconazole, and also echinocandin. This is another class of antifungal, such as caspofungin, micafungin, anidulafungin. These are antifungals belonging to the class of echinocandin. And then these are the doses. Here we have seen the regimens, which all antibiotics can be given. All these are broad spectrum antibiotics, and we need to give 2 antibiotics belonging to 2 different classes. Then if risk factors for fungal infection is present, we can also give, along with the antibiotics, some antifungals also. Triazoles are preferred in case of stable patients, and even we can go for echinocandin, such as caspofungin, micafungin, and anidulafungin. These are the doses. Then apart from this antimicrobial or antifungal agents, we need to give some supportive therapies also. So supportive therapies includes like if the patient is having some respiratory distress, we have to give mechanical ventilation. Then sometimes oxygen support is required. So oxygen can be given through the mask, or tracheal intubation can be done. So mechanical ventilation or tracheal intubation or oxygen through mask can be given. Then if the patient is having any pain or is showing delirium and is unstable or showing lot of irritation and all, so we can go for sedation as well as analgesia. Then it is also important that the patient's glucose is under control. So normalization of blood glucose is very important, especially in critically ill patients. Even if they have no diabetes, the blood glucose has to be, because under stress, even if this is a very stress, our body is going through like a very great stress. So under that stressful situation, the blood glucose can go high, even if the patient is not diabetic. So it is important that we have to normalize the blood glucose level. So in order to normalize the blood glucose level, we can go for, because hyperglycemia can like impair the immune response. So our immune response also, along with all the antibiotics, or whatever treatment we give, our body's immune response is also important. So if the patient is having hyperglycemia, the hyperglycemic state itself is going to impair our own immune response. So it is important that we maintain the blood glucose level. So we have to remember the blood glucose level has to be normalized, not in just the diabetic patients. Even in the normal people who doesn't have diabetics also, under stressful situation, the blood glucose can go high. So here we can go for IV insulin infusion. So insulin infusion can be given like 1 to 4 units per hour can be given so that the blood glucose is maintained normal between 110 and 180 milligram per deciliter. So we have to remember that glucose is under control by giving. We can control it by giving IV insulin infusion, continuous IV insulin infusion. The starting dose be 1 to 4 units per hour so that we can control the blood glucose within the normal range between 110 and 180 milligram per deciliter, because hyperglycemia impairs the immune response. Then glucose control, then renal replacement therapy. So like when we studied the pathophysiology of the septic shock, we know that hypoperfusion is there. So we have also seen that like in signs and symptoms, apart from all the signs and symptoms of the infectious state, there are the patient may also show some other signs and symptoms based upon which organ it is affected. For example, in case of kidney failure, there is oliguria. That is, there will be reduced urine output because the renal blood supply or renal perfusion is reduced because of the septic shock. So there is chance of acute kidney injury because of the lack of blood supply. And when there is acute kidney injury, what happens? The kidney's role is to eliminate the urea and creatinine. So when we have kidney injury, the urea and creatinine level increases. So urea and creatinine level should not be so high, and if it is so high, then it is going to cause some other complications. So we need to go for sometimes hemodialysis. So renal replacement therapy means one example of renal replacement therapy is hemodialysis. Then similarly, we have hemodialysis, we have peritoneal dialysis. So something has to be done to compensate for the kidney failure. So renal replacement therapy such as hemodialysis should be done in case if we find that there is acute kidney injury or there is elevated urea creatinine level. So here the organ failure is kidney. So we have to go for hemodialysis in such patients. Then venous thromboembolism prophylaxis. So this is we studied in pathophysiology. There is disseminated intravascular coagulation. So throughout the body, the blood circulation inside the blood vessel, what is happening? Coagulation as well as simultaneous bleeding is happening. So there is chance that this clot, we also discussed, the clot will break and it can go and occlude any other blood supply. For example, it can go and occlude the artery that is giving blood to the brain. So it can result in stroke. It can go and occlude or it can go and block the artery that is supplying blood to the lungs. So pulmonary embolism. All these can happen because inside throughout the blood vessel in our body, coagulation as well as bleeding is happening. So in order to like so many clots are formed, and these clots break up and can go and block arteries to the lungs, to the heart, to the brain. So it can cause stroke, pulmonary embolism, heart attack. So all these are possible. So we need to, in order to avoid that, we have to also give venous thromboembolism prophylaxis. So some blood thinning agents. In case of pulmonary embolism, we have to give. So many drugs are there. So many drugs are there to prevent VTE, venous thromboembolism, that we need to give. VTE prophylaxis we need to give. Then stress ulcer prophylaxis. Stress ulcer prophylaxis is also important because the patient is undergoing a lot of stress and the patient is receiving a lot of antibiotics. So there is chance of stress ulcer in the stomach. So in order to avoid that, we can go for the pantoprazole, proton pump inhibitor, etc. Then nutrition is also important because patient is not taking anything orally. So we need to give nutrition. So most of the time we have to go for total parenteral nutrition or some lactate solution. All those are there, but I think total parenteral nutrition has to be given if the patient is going without food for a week or so. So apart from antibiotic or antifungal, we need to also give supportive therapies such as um, mechanical ventilation, like oxygen support through mask or tracheal intubation, then sedation and analgesia in case if the patient is highly irritable and there is pain, then glucose control because hyperglycemia can happen even in non-diabetic patients because of this, because the body is under so many stress. So hyperglycemia can impair the immune system. So it is important that we control the blood glucose by giving IV insulin, continuous IV insulin infusion. Then in certain cases where organ failure happens, so especially if kidney failure happens, we have to go for hemodialysis. Then we also have studied if there is increased like disseminated intravascular coagulation what happens. So in order to avoid um, embolism, in order to avoid pulmonary embolism or stroke or heart attack, we need to give VTE prophylaxis. Then we also can see in patients who in ICU and all, they are more prone to get stress also. So we have to give proton pump inhibitors or any other H2 blocker, etc. Then nutrition is also important. So these are the medications, therapy. So antibiotics, then those patients with some risk factors, we need to give um, antifungals, etc. So this is the management. I hope it is clear for everyone. So do you have any doubts? The antibiotic part, I think you will be more clear when the pharmacology part is done. So have you got any doubts? No. Thank you.